Hello class. In this video, we're going to be continuing our work with fractions, but instead of adding with unlike denominators, we're going to focus on subtracting with unlike denominators. And the process is very similar. But before we get into that, I want you in your notebooks to write a brand new heading with your first and last name, mathematics, the date, your period number, and the title of subtraction with unlike denominators. Let's write that in our notebooks now. Now that we have that in our notebooks, we can work on some examples. And the process is the same as with addition, where you first write it the way that you're comfortable writing it. Then you find equivalent fractions that has the same denominators for both. Okay, so we're not changing the fraction, we're just putting it in a different form. Then we substitute the original fraction with its equivalent fraction that has the same denominator. Then we would subtract, then we simplify. Process is exactly the same as with addition, with the exception that we're going to subtract instead of add at the end. So let's look at our first example. And it's already written in the form that we are comfortable with. But this fraction has a denominator of 2. This one has a denominator of 3. So we need to find equivalent fractions. So again, on the side, I'm just going to write the two fractions, 1/2 and 1/3. And I look at this, and again in class I'm going to go over different ways of finding common denominators, but for the simplicity of this video we are going to just use the multiplying of the other fraction's denominator. So the other fraction's denominator for this fraction would be 3. So I multiply both the numerator and the denominator. Remember, I need to do both. Okay, so 1 times 3 is 3. And 2 times 3 is 6. And do the same thing. So the opposite denominator for this fraction is 2. So I'm going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 2. And I have 1 times 2 gives me 2. And 3 times 2 gives me 6. So 3/6 is an equivalent fraction to 1/2. And 2/6 is an equivalent fraction to 1/3. So I'm going to write them here. So 1/2 equivalent fraction is 3/6. I copy down the subtraction, and then the equivalent fraction for 1/3 is 2/6. Now I'm just going to be mindful and tell you to be careful that you leave a space between the addition and the subtraction and the fraction lines. Otherwise you're going to think it's just one fraction. Now I can subtract because both my denominators are the same. I could do 3 minus 2, and the denominator of 6 goes on the bottom. So 3 minus 2 is 1, and I keep the denominator of 6. And I look, can I simplify this? Really? No, we can't. So I'm going to circle this, and this is going to be my final answer, 1/6. Okay, so make sure that you write your equivalent fractions, then you subtract, and then you simplify. In this case, we can't simplify, so we're just going to write our final answer as 1/6. I want you to pause this video now and write this in your notebooks. Now that we have this in our notebooks, let's try another one. So again, this is written because this is the way most people type because we don't have that mathematical function. So I rewrite it the way that I'm comfortable seeing it. So I have 2/3 minus 1/4. So it's 2/3 minus 1/4. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite that there. And now I'm going to write these fractions because the denominators are separate. I'm going to write them on the side. So I have 2/3 and I have 1/4. For the purpose of this video, we're finding the common denominator by multiplying the other denominator of the other fraction. So this is a 4, so this one is going to be multiplied by 4, both the numerator and the denominator. 2 times 4 is 8, and 3 times 4 is 12. The other denominator from the 1/4 is 3, so I'm going to multiply both of them by 3. So 1 times 3 gives me 3, and 4 times 3 gives me 12. So these are my equivalent fractions. So I'm going to rewrite the equivalent fractions. So the equivalent fraction of 2/3 is the 8/12. So I'm going to rewrite that. I copy down my subtraction, and then my equivalent of the 1/4 was 3/12. So I'm going to rewrite the 3/12. I'm being mindful of leaving spaces between my fraction lines and the subtraction so I don't get confused. And now I can subtract. So I have 8 minus 3 over 12. I can only combine this because both my denominators are the same. They're both 12 now. And now I know 8 minus 3 is 5, and my denominator stays the same as 12. And I look, is there a way of simplifying this? There is none, because 5 could only be divided by 5 and 1 doesn't change anything, so there's nothing to do that. And 12 divided by 5, I can do, but I'll get a decimal answer. And that is one thing we never want to do, is have a decimal in our fraction. So this would be my final answer. So I'm going to circle that. I want you to pause this video and write the question and all of the work in our notebooks. Now that we have this down, let's look at another one. So again, this is the way it's typed. So I'm going to rewrite it the way I'm comfortable working with it, which is 7/10, 7 over 10, minus 1 over 2, which is 1/2. And I notice this has a denominator of 10, and this one has one of 2. So I know I have to find equivalent fractions. So I'm going to rewrite the 7/10 and the 1/2. And for the simplicity of this video, I'm multiplying it by the opposite denominator. Again, in class, we will work on finding other ways of finding a common denominator. Okay, but for this purpose of this video, that's what we're doing. So the opposite fraction, denominator of the opposite fraction is 2. So I'm going to multiply both of these by 2. And I go 7 times 2 is 14. And 10 times 2 is 20. So I have 14 over 20, or 14/20. The opposite denominator of 1/2 is 10. So I'm going to multiply both my numerator and my denominator by 10. And then I have 1 times 10 is 10, and 2 times 10 is 20, so I get 10/20. Now that I have my equivalent fractions, I'm going to rewrite it. So my equivalent fraction of 7/10 is 14/20. So I'm going to write 14/20. Subtract, and my equivalent fraction to 1/2 is 10 over 20, or 10/20. So I'm going to copy that down to 10 over 20. I noticed that my denominators are completely the same. So now I could turn around and I can actually subtract them. So I could do 14 minus 10 over 20. 14 minus 10 is 4. And my denominator stays the same of 20. Now I look at this, and my numerator is smaller than my denominator. So I know that I do not have any whole numbers. But I notice both 4 and 20 are even numbers. So I can actually divide both of them by a number. So I could say divide by 2 on here, right? Because they're both even. And 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. And 20 divided by 2 gives me 10. I notice now I'm left with both again that are even numbers, so I could divide them both again by 2. Now, if I noticed over here that I could divide by 4, I could have done that too, but I didn't. So I'm just doing another step. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I have to do this sideways because I ran out of room. And 10 divided by 2 is 5. So my final answer here is now 1/5, because 1 can only be divided by 1. And it doesn't change anything when I divide anything by 1. So this is my final answer. I'm going to circle it. I want you to pause this video now and write in your notebook, okay, our question and all of our work. Now that we have done 3 of them together in this video, I'm going to give you 2 to do in your own. Again, this is the way we would type it in regular typing. We're used to seeing this as 3 over 4, subtract it by 2/3. So it's 3/4 minus 2/3 equal. That's what you need to find. And on this one, we would write this as 2 over 3, or 2/3, minus 3 over 5, or 3/5. Be careful to keep your separation between your fraction lines and your subtraction. Okay? Now that we've written it the way we're used to seeing it, you need to find equivalent fractions that have the same denominator. Then you would subtract, and then you would simplify if you need to. You may watch this video as many times as you need to in order to solve this, but you must attempt it and show all of your work to receive full credit. Again, rewatch the video and write down any questions that you may have so that we can answer them in class.